Hello, and welcome to the Act 3 Progress Report video. This is a video meant to go over all the progress that's been made in HorrorVale since the completion of Act 2 in October of 2020 until the pseudo completion of Act 3 in December of 2021. We'll get more into what pseudo completion means later. For those unaware, we actually regularly post development updates on our Twitter, Discord, and Patreon. However, we understand that not everyone has accounts on these platforms or likes to read every single thing we put out like a mad person. You may be somebody who recently finished the Act 1 demo and then wondered, how has the game progressed since they released this? Or, when is the full game going to come out? This video is targeted towards these types of people. Of course, even if you stay consistently updated on the game's progress and know most of this, you might find it entertaining anyway. If you haven't seen the Act 2 Progress Report video before this one, we recommend you check out that one first. After the completion of Act 2, rather than immediately jump into Act 3, we instead implemented several integral features into the game, such as the diary and potion brewing mechanics. In the previous video, we discussed how the player is able to use Barnaby's farm in order to grow various crops. In fact, these crops are utilized in the potion brewing mechanic. In addition to these crops, the second ingredient necessary to brew potions are monster drops, which are essentially pieces of the enemy that you collect after defeating them. By combining these two types of ingredients in a cauldron, Alice is able to brew potions. There's many different combinations of ingredients and many different outcomes, so you'll have a lot of options available to you to gain the advantage in battle using them. As for the diary mechanic, this feature allows you to not only keep track of where you are in the main story, but allows you to review tutorials and side quests. It not only keeps track of where you are in side quests and provides hints on how to continue them, but also provides hints for quests you haven't even started yet. For instance, if you're not sure if you've collected all the possible party members in an area, you can check the diary and see if there's any you haven't done yet and get hints on where to start them. Once these features were taken care of, we jumped right into development proper for Act 3. In Act 2, progression is broken up into many different smaller areas, each with their own unique aesthetics, puzzles, music, enemies, and more. As stated in the last video, this complicated development and resulted in a longer development time. With Act 3, the focus was instead on two major areas, both of which are incredibly unique compared to the rest of the game up until this point, but this brought along its own challenges. The second major area is actually the one we started first, the beguiling bog. In this area, even from our very early concepts, we wanted to create a large place the player could get lost in. The original idea was to just have a massive wide open swamp littered with set pieces the player wades through the murky blood slowly, shrouded in complete darkness. However, we realized this might not make a very interesting gameplay experience over a long period. So instead, it was decided to have a still very large swamp, but make it denser and more maze-like, with areas you could walk on land and areas you could wade through the blood. So, we set out conceptualizing this with the idea in mind to create the largest area in the game and to also make it as dense as possible. Incidentally, this created another developmental challenge due to the limitations of RPG Maker. In RPG Maker, the larger a map is and the more events it has, the more lag can occur. Even on more modern machines, an extremely large area can still cause problems. So, to get around this, we created the entire map as one large image and then split it up into several smaller maps. So, unfortunately, exploring the bog is accompanied by many transitions. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it is a bit disappointing that we were not able to make the entire thing seamless. The original full image file for this area was so large, so detailed, and had so many layers that Paint Tool Sci, the program used for the art, could barely even handle it without frequent crashes. The result was a multi-month-long endeavor. The map art alone took multiple months to put together, from the concept stage to rough drafts to final drafts. Afterwards, that wasn't even enough, as it then had to be filled with many NPCs, enemies, frogs, party members, events, and more. Work on the Beguiling Bog took place from November of 2020 to May of 2021. That's nearly 7 months dedicated to this single area of the game, and we weren't even technically done with it. More on that later. Next, we took a step back to work on the first major area of Act 3, Dracula Manor. Where the Beguiling Bog was a massive, wide-open maze-like area full of enemies and things to discover, Dracula Manor is instead a single large house. In almost a stark contrast to the wide-open freedom of the bog, Dracula Manor features the most cutscene event-intensive part of the game, as Alice and her new friend Beatrice seek to uncover a deadly mystery. We really don't want to go too much into what that actually entails, but what we can say is that from a developmental perspective, this required a massive amount of planning. Not only was the house the most complex, most detailed interior in the game, but it had to be specifically created for its intended purpose and created in a way that makes sense for the progression of the story events to unfold. I had to make this place in The Sims before I could draw a single pixel. After countless hours of drawing staircases, vampires, and writing an absurd amount of dialogue, Dracula Manor was finally completed in August of 2021. That's around 4 or 5 months for just this part. If you add up the total, we're almost at a year of development just for Act 3, with the end still a ways away. This is ultimately the challenge I described earlier in the video of having 2 major areas and putting in so much content and focus on those areas specifically. In between the extremely simple and linear Act 1 to the massively segmented Act 2 to the hyper-focused Act 3, HorrorVale absolutely never lets you get bored of what's going on. Once this was completed, we returned to do the finishing touches of the bog, which mostly included a segment we like to call the Webs segment. While Alice is uncovering the mysteries of Dracula Manor, Webs McGregor, her spider friend from Act 2, takes the rest of her party into the bog for reconnaissance. Due to the weather, the bog that Webs explores and the one that Alice and the full party explores later in the act are actually very different. Because of the rain, the blood levels have raised, blocking off certain pathways while opening up others. This is a pretty interesting segment of the game, because not only does it help break up the cutscene-heavy Dracula Manor by changing perspectives frequently, but it allows the player to experience a HorrorVale segment without Alice. We should also mention that while all of these things were being developed over the course of 2021, we are also working on the 12 new party members that can be found in it. That means 12 new party members, each with their own unique moveset, stats, graphics, you get the idea. Talk about deja vu. It should be noted that around this time we brought on a new artist named Dan to help out with things. His ability to mimic the HorrorVale art style is nothing short of impressive, and you likely won't even be able to tell who did what. First, he helped us create some of the art scene in Dracula Manor, and was next tasked with drawing the area art necessary for a large number of side quests available in Act 3. For the first time ever, we were able to develop HorrorVale by doing multiple tasks at once. Crazy, right? It wasn't long before the final area of Act 3 was completed in December of 2021, although we won't be showing any of it for spoiler reasons. This essentially marked the end of Act 3 development, sort of. It's time to talk about the pseudo completion we mentioned before. At this point, pretty much all of the main story stuff of Act 3 was completed. The only things left to finish were the party members' side quests. Since we had a second artist now, there was no reason to wait around to start the development of Act 4 when Dan could work on the party member side quest art, so we jumped right into Act 4. Eventually, we will have a video like this for all the development after this point, but for the sake of covering all Act 3 content, the Act 3 party member side quests were officially completed later next year in June of 2022, all while multitasking and working on Act 4. Having more team members is great. Who knows where we would be right now without that help. That pretty much summarizes all the major work done on Act 3, without going too much into spoiler territory, of course. The next progress report video likely won't happen until HorrorVale is almost out, so we hope you'll be patient. If you like this video, leave us a like, post a comment, or subscribe to see more HorrorVale content. Thank you for watching this progress video for HorrorVale Act 3.